Hello everyone, it's me, Martinez-Bateman. I am the CEO of New Coyote Consulting, and we are an equity and communications consulting firm here in the Pacific Northwest. This is a view that I usually reserve for my TikToks, because I am getting ready for bed right now. But I realized I hadn't recorded a Monday update, and I thought, well, I'll try it, and if it doesn't work out, I'll delete it. So if you're seeing this, it's because I thought it worked out. I've been feeling really scattered lately. Having that week-long snowstorm that basically stretched from the end of February to the very beginning of March. There was still snow on the ground yesterday. It really threw me off. It really did. I always talk about how February for me in Portland is really hard to live through because it's really, really dark and really cold and really wet. And my little Los Angeles brain thinks that winter should have ended on December 31st. And so when it snows in February, like it's been doing lately, it just really sets me off. Although I know that it's snowed as late as April, although usually it snows and then it goes away. It doesn't linger for days and days. So there's definitely something there for me. I'm trying to soak up every bit of sunshine that I can. If the sun comes out, I try to get in it somehow. But I don't know, I've been feeling sort of thinky lately. I feel like there's sort of something that I'm about to come upon, in my brain. I'm about to sort of not really figure it out. I think my big epiphanies, not necessarily that they're behind me, but for right now, I don't feel like big epiphanies are what's in my cards. I just sort of come upon these realizations that are very helpful and they sort of roll in, I've been really, over the last several years, very invested in doing work for other queer BIPOC people and with other queer BIPOC people. Because I had this big realization at the end of 2019 that I had been, showing up in these typically majority white spaces. They were generally, perpetuating white supremacy. I mean, aren't we all? But they were doing it in a way that was knowledgeable and, they'd been confronted on it and they just didn't feel like it was a priority to stop harming people. And I disagreed. And so I usually had conflict in my work. And I just realized that I had spent my whole life working really hard, doing really good work for systems that were built to exploit people like me, and also to leverage my labor to further exploit others. And I think I'd always had this basic understanding that I was being exploited. I mean, if you grow up in capitalism, I feel like it's kind of obvious. But the further, deeper level that I was being used to exploit others was not clear to me for a really long time. And I finally got to this place. I'm just kind of snotty. I'm not crying or anything. But I just got to this place where I wasn't okay with it anymore. And I didn't really know how to proceed, but New Coyote was born out of that impulse to just stop being used to harm others. To whatever extent I could make that possible, that's what I would do. Which is interesting because after this whole journey, it's been 3 years, I read Ursula Burns, her memoir, Where You Are Is Not Who You Are. And Ursula Burns is the first, I think she's the first ever Black woman who is CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And she was the CEO of Xerox from 2009 to 2016, which, if anyone was around then, you'll recall was the recession. She took over Xerox like right as it was going into the recession, and I don't actually remember her from back then. I don't remember knowing about her back then, but I do remember knowing about Gary Bonadonna, who was the executive. I think he was the leader of the United Workers, but either way, he was the person who was in charge of the negotiation for the union contract for Xerox. And I remember watching that very carefully because Xerox was such a strong union company that there were people saying, you know, Xerox is never going to do layoffs. That's just not who they are. There's no way. And I remember very distinctly Xerox doing layoffs being like a big turning point in the recession when we knew things were like not only very, very serious, but also that things were changing and that they would never be the same again. They would never change back. And reading Ursula's side of the story was very helpful for me. Also, having had all of these ensuing years, I think when I was young, when it was 2009, when I was reading about the negotiations and the layoffs, and I was talking to people who were involved in a deeper way, I really felt like the workers should have struck. There should have been big resistance. They should have done everything they could have to make that company pay for what it was doing to them, which was, you know, offloading them by the thousands in order to save its own ass. But really beginning at the beginning of her book, Ursula, and potentially even in the introduction, Ursula basically lays it out and says, you know, whatever you think about the layoffs I'm obviously paraphrasing, like hugely paraphrasing. Whatever you think about the layoffs at Xerox, she was like, you cannot be the CEO of a publicly traded company and mistake your customer for your customer. She was like, when you are the CEO of a publicly traded company, your customer is your shareholder. And I felt like that was like the most honest part of the book. I felt like it was also I have a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts about the book. I feel like there's a lot of stuff I can criticize her on as a business person, as a person who believes in commerce and invests in commerce and cares a lot about markets. I think that there's some criticism I can have of her as a fellow non-man. I think that there's some criticism I can have of her as a fellow person of color, as a fellow person who grew up in poverty. There's also a lot of stuff that is not my place to criticize, where I can't speak to the fact that she's a Black woman. I can't speak to the fact that she was born in the 50s. Like, all of these things that are her context that aren't mine to criticize. But it was really just interesting reading that book and thinking back about my experience as a union person during that period of time, and also seeing the places where, you know, if you're a person of color in leadership, you get told to sit down and shut up constantly. You get told that you need to be nicer, that your tone is wrong, that you need to rephrase things, that it's, oh, they're not racist. They just, some dumb fucking bullshit excuse for their racism, right? And it was interesting how she told stories about how, you know, white people really helped sort of like do good allyship with her and stewardship of her, and like, you know, also held space for her rage, which was like really important. And I thought that was like really cool, because it's definitely what hasn't been my experience in a lot of situations, not always, but in a lot. But there were also times when I felt like, and I'm saying this from my experience, when I was coming up in the workforce, older people of color told me to sit down and shut up a lot. They also told me to watch out and not be friends with the boss. And I didn't take either of those advices. I definitely should have taken the second one. But I feel like one of the things about my career and my job and New Coyote and everything that I'm doing here is I'm asking myself, like, what would happen if I just said no? What would happen if someone told me to sit down and shut up and I said no? And so far, this is what's happening, you know? Like, I'm still making a living. I'm still getting by. Things, you know, the sun still rises and sets, and it, nothing exploded. Nobody died. You know, I've been able to do a lot of things that I really care about and find to be very important in the world. So I'd say it's a win for me, but I think that there was this promise that was made to the generation before us, the boomer generation, that if we just behaved, if we just showed up and did good work and did hard work, and made systems better, things would get better for us. And by us, I mean the boomers. Things would get better for the boomers. Things would get better for the Gen Xers. Things would get better for the millennials. And that is not what we have found. So I don't think that I'm in a place to judge a person who is so much older than me and had so many different options than I have had for their choices in their career. But I think I am in a place to learn from that. I am in a place to look at that and say, perhaps all the times you zigged, I'm going to zag. And by the time I'm writing my memoirs, there is going to be a lot to criticize. I'm not afraid of that. I am afraid of going forward in this world, not just as the CEO of New Coyote, but also just like as myself. I am afraid of going forward in this world doing something other than my heart calls me to do. And I think I'm going to make choices inevitably that people will look back on and be like, wow, that was dumb. But then they can be like, I'm not going to do that. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. Is I want to make my own mistakes, and I want to make new mistakes, and I want to be able to leave behind something that someone can follow or not follow as is their need and proclivity and context. So that's my takeaway from Ursula Burns' book. Have a lunch, have a weekend, everybody. I'll see you next week.